Welcome everyone to this webinar on virtual chamber music making. My name is Laura Usiskin and I am the cellist of the Bayberry String Quartet. And we have Nurit Pacht, our Hamilton lover and first violinist, Stephanie Kadiyama, second violinist, and our violist Gabe Bulkowski. And since this is a chamber music webinar, we thought we'd start with some chamber music. So I'm going to play for you a little Mozart to kick things off. That was the exposition to Mozart String Quartet, K155 in D major. That was the four of us playing, and that's a piece that we have rehearsed and worked on entirely during this pandemic. We chose it because it's a piece that students often play, and we thought it might be an interesting experience to work on our method using a student piece. And I thought I would tell you a little bit about the quartet. We became a quartet 2 years ago in 2018, and we live in 3 different states. I live in Birmingham, Alabama. Gabe and Stephanie are married and live in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Nurit lives in New Rochelle, New York, which is right outside New York City. And so when we became a quartet, we decided to explore remote rehearsing really from the get-go. I remember one of our first concerts was in November of that year, and we were able to get together in person in October. And then we had a month where we really wanted to make some progress and work. So we sort of clunkily tried out some techniques. And I will tell you that when we got together in November, it was so exciting. I remember feeling just electrified because it worked. The things that we had been doing really paid off. The parts that we had rehearsed remotely were better than the parts that we hadn't. And so it was a very exciting moment for us. And we realized that this is a tool that works. And so that's what we've been doing this whole time as a quartet, is working in our 3 states and then getting together when we're able to. So when the pandemic hit, part of us thought, well, we know how to do this, and we'll just kind of keep working. But we also started thinking, how can we organize ourselves, and how can we teach this to our students? And so for most of the late spring and summer, we've been working on developing a method for virtual chamber music making. And it's been a real sort of, I would call it a labor of love to put it together and organize ourselves. We've worked with student groups over the summer, and they seem to have a very positive experience. I will say that the name of our method is called Phoenix Fest Virtual. We may refer to it as P2V in this webinar. webinar, and the name comes from a wonderful chamber music program called Phoenix Fest. That's Fest with a PH, Phoenix Fest. Our violist Gabe Polkowski has run Phoenix Fest for 20 years, and it's a wonderful, wonderful festival. We were going to teach there this summer, and so we call it Phoenix Fest Virtual because of that festival. And I'll also mention that Phoenix Fest is sponsored by the wonderful nonprofit that used to be called Phoenix Ensemble, is now Education for Happiness. And Gabe is the executive director of Education for Happiness. And there are many wonderful aspects of music making that Education for Happiness embodies that we have tried to infuse into our methods. So you're going to sort of see that along the way. So that's just a little info about us to get us started. I'm going to turn things over to Stephanie now. She's going to give you a little overview of the method.
For us, making music virtually relies on recording using a digital audio workstation. The recording is a part of a larger sequential system that we've created out of a desire to stay connected. The experience feels rich because we share a process, but there's room for each of us to find in the process what satisfies us artistically. So for me, I love having the time to explore. So I can explore my quartet mates playing and their ideas, my own playing and my ideas, and how they fit together. So it really gives me an opportunity to listen back as many times as I want with different mindsets, and I can really hear if the music is moving me. So this kind of brings me to my next point, which is that working remotely has really shown us the magic of the recording studio. Recording in a studio is a tool that's not typically relied on in classical music learning. We often use it as an end point in the process and not as a part of the process. So it really allows us to hear our art in a way like a painter would. Like if they paint and they step back to look at what they've done, they can make decisions about changes, and then they can go in and try again. So our method is based on recording, and specifically we're talking about recording in layers. So one person will lay down a track, and then another person will record on top of it while listening to that track. And this is an idea that has been around in the pop world for a long time, and it's called multi-track recording. The Beatles, especially their fifth member, their producer, Sir George Martin, they really made multi-tracking into an art form that influenced millions of people. And the studio became an essential part of their process. And we're sort of feeling that too. You know, working online is not just a temporary solution, but it has real meaning to us in our artistry. We've been able to connect in a deeper way and really find artistic creativity together. So if this isn't enough to convince you, Nurit's going to speak a little bit more about in-person versus virtual chamber music, and then we're going to go into a little more detail about our approach, which is rooted in wellness principles and collaboration.
So yeah, as Laura was saying, we live in 3 different states, and we started rehearsing remotely long before the pandemic for our in-person concerts. So when we would meet for the very first time for our in-person rehearsals, we felt like we were already rather well rehearsed because we would usually only meet during the week before. And we learned that there are many ways that an ensemble can approach a rehearsal remotely. I'm going to compare an in-person rehearsal with a virtual rehearsal, and naturally, because of the nature of this webinar, I'm going to advocate for virtual rehearsal. So please bear with me. When experienced musicians meet in person for rehearsals, we often wing it. And it usually goes, at least in my experience, when I meet up with a conductorless ensemble to prepare a program. Now I say conductorless because usually a conductor comes into the first rehearsal with a plan, but ensembles, we go into a rehearsal and we do wing it. We have no plan. That's one of the first features of a first rehearsal, and that's actually okay. We kind of like that. It's a democracy. It's we're gonna see what happens, see what people suggest, and great. The second thing is we usually at least again in my experience, we play through from beginning to end, not even just the first movement. Like, let's just see what we're up against. We're going to play the whole piece. And I love this. Most people love it because it's a way of saying, okay, look, I'm prepared for this rehearsal, or now we know what we're up against, what we need to work on. This is how the piece goes. I think we're going to be okay when we have to play this program in a few days. So that's good. And in-person memory is actually very important. So we, of course, we don't necessarily have to play by memory, but when we rehearse or we're playing through, say, a movement, we have to remember what went wrong so that we can suggest what should we rehearse next. And so that kind of memory is paramount to having a productive rehearsal. The fourth thing is repetition. We use repetition to get used to playing with the other parts, with different kinds of players, and also we use repetition to become more at ease with difficult passages, with challenging rhythmic areas. And finally, in in-person rehearsing, it's really important that we rely, I mean, we just do this sort of naturally, we rely on visual cues, like, where is this player playing in their bow? And then you think, oh, okay, well, I'm going to play in the upper half for that. Or somebody's breath, and you can see and you can feel their breath. I consider that a visual cue. And bow direction, various ways to maintain eventually consistency. So now for the virtual ways that we rehearse. This is what we've learned as a quartet. The first thing is we can't not have a plan for our first rehearsal. We definitely have to create a plan. We have to decide who starts, who plays next, who adds their part next. Why should that person add their part next? How big of a section should we play? Should we just go to where there's a tempo change, or can we just play a bigger part? And we decide that before we lay down any recording. Secondly, the playthrough, as we compare it to the in-person rehearsal. A playthrough from beginning to end in virtual rehearsing, it's possible, but we would recommend to opt out of this, out of a complete playthrough. It's possible to play through work from beginning to end, but it's just not efficient. So much information is shared and collected when we lay down a track. So it's overwhelming to take an entire movement, let alone a full-scale work, and put down that track. That's just, we haven't done that as a quartet. So you know what? Maybe we should try just to prove my point. And then the third thing for virtual rehearsing, memory is not essential. We don't need to rely on our memories of how it went, because we replay those takes, or as the BandLab tracks that we just replay them as much as we want. We could take notes in the score and listen again. And that it actually makes us remember everything more because we've had that luxury. And then repetition. So in virtual rehearsing, we can repeat freely. We can use repetition in a very personal way. Those who need it, they will use it, and they will use it more. And there isn't what we often have in an in-person rehearsal, like a frustration. Somebody wants to do it again and again. We don't have that problem, because if you want to do it again and again, you do it again and again on your own terms. So then the last aspect of virtual rehearsing that is actually somewhat of a challenge is that we don't have visual cues. In the virtual studio, we cannot rely on that, and we have to compensate for that So if we want to do rubato, we have to have a discussion about that. So we don't get to be spontaneous about it. So I'm trying to prove that there are more perks to virtual rehearsing than drawbacks. And of course, we all want to be together, and that cannot be replaced. But based on my little list, we should be able, all of us, to accomplish so much. The lack of visual cues it's possible to make up for that drawback by understanding pulse and making group decisions. And some of us tend to play on the front of the beat and some of us on the back of the beat. And the virtual studio makes us also more aware of what our qualities are. And virtual rehearsing also requires that we and our students take more time for listening. So listening to each other's recordings and analyzing and discussing them, it leads to more familiarity with our musical partners, not just their playing, but their ideas, because they have time to react to what they're hearing and they're able to express themselves more easily. So inevitably, this will lead to deeper score study. I'm hearing a lot of frustration from wonderful musicians about their fruitless attempts at remote rehearsing. So before we proceed reluctantly, let's acknowledge some of the disadvantages of in-person rehearsals. As cumbersome as it may be to learn how to operate a new digital audio workstation, the logistics that we have to almost always consider when we plan for an in-person rehearsal are pretty complicated as well. I mean, we're used to it, but they are complicated. Like we have to make an arrangement for a rehearsal space. And as a New Yorker, it's not an easy task. You have time constraints on that rehearsal space. And then we have to spend time transporting ourselves to and from that place, sometimes from different cities. And that's also added financial expense. So these are definite drawbacks. Here's another drawback to in-person, that we have to accommodate our schedules for others. The rehearsals that are set, especially with a large group, that's it, they're set in stone. And what's fun about virtual rehearsing is that it leaves us with more freedom to decide when we work, and we work as frequently as we see fit. So in Bayberry String Quartet, we have our Zoom rehearsals and they're face-to-face, and they're usually at what people call normal hours. But my quartet members will tell you that because it shows up on their email notifications from BandLab, that I am doing my best recordings at 1 o'clock in the morning. When like after midnight, at midnight, I listen to everybody's track because that's when my house becomes less chaotic. So I have the time and the peace to work when it's good for me. And this is a luxurious way to stay connected and to progress as a group. So even if we have busy days, there's always time to do something to propel our ensemble. And we've embarked on this journey out of desperation. We were simply worried that we wouldn't sound good enough if we met in person for a short time. And then slowly we started to use our process to look for more invention. And we hope that it makes us more creative interpreters. Our preferred DAW, our DAW, everybody, Laura told me today that people refer to it as DAW, the digital audio workstation. We use BandLab. And we're not going to spend that much time on technology today because at bayberrystringquartet.com, we're offering basic information about how to get started with BandLab. I wish we had blogs like that when we started it because we had to go through lots of troubleshooting. So those should be really helpful. And it'll help you just gain fluency with it. Although if you are used to using GarageBand, then it'll be just no skin off your back to use BandLab. I recommend BandLab. Just we also explain that in one of our blogs, but more than GarageBand, because not everybody has a Mac, and GarageBand is specific to Macs, so to Apples. So today we will be discussing remote rehearsing as it relates to chamber music, but it is also applicable to larger ensembles as well. So if you're conducting an orchestra or a choir, the same techniques will apply. And now I'd like to give the floor to Gabe, our violist, who contributes every day in some small way towards his goal of making the world a better place through music making.
Thank you, Nurit, and that was lovely. It is just so great to see everybody here. I am so honored to see, you know, we have 58 people here with us today, and I have to admit I'm shaking a little bit. I'm a little nervous. I'm about to talk about wellness, so I should be honest, right? I'm vulnerable. So anyway, I'll start by saying that. So wellness is a buzzword these days, and I think one that kind of turns off people's minds. In my experience with Phoenix Fest, which is has basically been a 20-year laboratory about environment for all ages of people, and essentially about wellness, that a lot of times there's a group of people who, when the wellness part comes, they leave. And they leave because they don't need it, they're fine. And the implication is that they're strong enough to not need it. And, you know, of course we don't make them stay, but those are often the people I worry about the most, because the term has maybe numbed them to the point of not realizing what exactly it is, and that it's not necessarily easy. It's not always easy to stick around and do that extra thing that maybe doesn't take that much skill, but will make you more aware of what you're thinking and feeling right now. That's really the part that's hard. So, and the reason why at this seminar we're sort of easing you into kind of giving you answers is because I think I speak for the four of us when we say that wellness is the answer, and that everything that has come out of this was a result of wellness. It was a result of four people trying to communicate gently with one another to create something that would help them be creative together. So that's really what has grown all of this, and that's when we're done with this webinar and we go to work on our next unit, it will be in the same, you know, within the same structure of thinking about empathy first. I also think about Ani DeFranco, who is for those of you who don't know, she was I've lost track of her, but I listened to her a lot when I was younger. Singer, political activist, and there's a line from one of her songs, "Anything is a weapon if you hold it right." And so we want to be very careful when we're sharing this to make sure that it's not used either on purpose or by accident abusively. It's easy for us to go down a rabbit hole with this type of work and demand even more of ourselves instead of using it as a tool for both work and leisure, and something that will nourish us. And if we are able to understand that more clearly, I think our students will understand that more clearly, that music is for them first and then for everybody else. So a quick definition would be, in this particular situation, we think of wellness as the place, the in-between parts of learning. So the things that come up and pull us away from the nourishing part, unwanted thoughts, unwanted feelings. So wellness has to do with an awareness of our mind and an awareness of our body, and we try, and it needs to be gentle. Wellness should be like the touch of a feather on a glass. It should be that gentle. And that's the kind of awareness that we want to have I would argue in life, but certainly as musicians, to be aware but subtle. So we try to wrap that into things as we work on them. And I can speak more about that in the Q&A if people are curious, but I think that's the most important thing to me, would be questions about how to make sure that we take this opportunity to create a new and more loving environment for all people involved, both teachers and students, to create, happier people. And we really believe it starts with environment, and there's some opportunities here to take out some of the things in the environment that cause stress. So examples of that, we do meditation daily, and we also do a focus and meditation exercise called noting, which is, you can Google it. It's a fairly basic exercise, but we try to come back to it daily, and we will occasionally use it to help people focus on what they're working on, especially if they're feeling frustration or negative thoughts. Also included in this wellness is the idea of social exchange, finding ways for the participants to communicate that aren't just fun games or eating lunch together, that involve really having to create a project together, which is very similar to how Phoenix Fest has always been, project-based, and to teach them how to creatively problem solve based on their own skills. And then once they feel comfortable with it, to then, feel confident about sharing it with the community, and then hopefully that will encourage them to want to go through that cycle over and over again. So for us, this sudden online experience has sort of forced us to find a fundamental sequence to allow the students to be able to learn with a very clear objective each part of the way, with an understanding that sometimes their mind will wander, but they can come back to this awareness of what they're working on through these exercises, tools we've given them. And to make sure that that they don't have to experience shame along the way. So what I mean by that is that one of the pitfalls in chamber music learning is that sometimes there'll be one student who maybe is the same age as everybody else, or not, who knows? Actually, there's all different ways a student can be, we could say, behind the other students. They might not have learned their part well enough. They might have thought that they learned their part and then showed up and realized, whoa, this is harder than I thought. And there's that awkward moment when the other students sort of wilt, and you have to help, the violinist with their fingering, or the cellist doesn't know how to do the bowing. And so not only does it create sort of a sense of boredom in the group, which of course you can work around in person, but the hardest part is for the student who's being helped, and that feeling of knowing that they're sort of holding up the group. And this is the part of the system for us that we want to encourage other people to explore, is the idea that you can create sort of a synchronous, asynchronous braid that will allow people to move at their own pace. I think we're going to talk about that more later, but that's sort of the code that we feel like we've broken, is that there's really no class. It's, you show up for an extended period of time and you work until you need a break, and you meet with your team at various intervals, but because of the nature of how the time is structured, everyone can move as fast or as slowly as they want. I hope that makes sense the way I've said it. So certainly with students who have some trauma around learning, this is like a godsend to be able to work on a part and only have people listen to it when it feels ready, and to know that they can try again and again and again. And so I feel most excited to share this with people who feel particular trauma around learning, which I think is a lot more people than we realize. So that's something I'm really excited about. I also thought maybe as part of the presentation on wellness, I would just demonstrate that maybe the crux of the program is, and of our approach, is that we're trying to build character rather than build excellence. Our thought is that excellence is really a byproduct of character. And so if my wonderful wife is going to show this character model. So first off in the character model is the heart. So the heart, it is, we communicate to the students that the heart is what you want. It's the artistic image, if you will. And it's something that can be developed by doing a lot of listening, by reading books, plays, going to museums, seeing films, and developing a sense of empathy and desire to create. And then the heart sends that image to the head. And in this situation, the head would be the mind. So the mind says, okay, this is what you want. I'm going to figure out all of the details. I'm going to organize all of this for you. And I'm going to try it once I have this all organized. And then the head sends that information to the hand. And the hand in this situation represents action, doing things and trying out ideas. So then you try out the idea, and the sound in this case goes to the ear. And the ear sends that message. Hopefully the ear is listening carefully enough that it can send a clear message back to the heart again. And the heart will say yes or no. It will say, this sounds the way I want it, doesn't sound the way I want it. And before you can go through that cycle again, you have a moment, I call sort of the moment of integrity, where you have a choice to either learn more, to think about what's possible, why does this not sound the way I want, or to decide that it's not possible. And usually that involves some kind of blame. So if we use this workshop for an example, you might say, these 4 people are so charming, but online is it's just no place for me. And so, which may be true, but that would be a form of blame. You would be saying that the conditions don't allow. Another form of blame would be to say, this looks really cool, but these 4 people, I don't know if they really know what they're talking about. So, I'm gonna move on. So now you're blaming somebody else for not being able to move on. And then the final one would be, wow, this is amazing, but I can't do it. I suck at this. This is not something for me. And that would be, deciding to blame yourself. And if we realize that, and sometimes it's absolutely fine to stop, but just to be aware that those are the things that stop us. And if we can be aware of that and decide to try again, then the character model starts to get into motion. And the idea of being an artist starts to become splendid, because you're never looking for an ending point. You're only asking the question, can I still learn more? Or is this where I stop? So the hope is that that's what we've created, and that BandLab and Zoom are just sort of a tool that we're very thankful for, but has sort of woven its way into the structure of what we do. but very much based on the need to connect and the need to feel like we're creating something together. Over to you, Laura.
Thank you, Gabe. I'm going to talk now. I'm going to go get down and dirty and show you what we're talking about in a little bit more detail and give you an example of something that we do with our students. So this, like everyone's been saying, our approach is based on layering. So one person lays down a track and then everybody else adds to that track. And so I've prepared this track for you, and the step I'm going to be talking about we call getting to know you. And what you're looking at right now is a BandLab, sort of the main page for this project. And so I'm going to open this up, and now you're going to see viola. You're going to see Gabe has laid down this little track. One thing that we've mentioned is that we don't expect the students or ourselves to just record the whole piece. We pick manageable chunks we break down their pieces into manageable chunks. For a beginner group, that might be 8 bars, might be all that they can do at a time. For us, that exposition you heard at the beginning, that was our manageable chunk for that piece. We thought we could do that much. So we break it into sections. That's something that you could do for your students, like here are your sections, or you could have them do it themselves. It sort of depends on if you think they could handle it. But anyway, so here, Gabe, I've given you a extremely microscopic chunk. This is about 5 measures, just for the sake of time. Viola has already done it. I see that Viola spelled wrong. I know everyone's looking at it. Okay, now it's better. And I'm going to show you how I get to know him. So I'm going to add a track. So there's a button here that says add track. And we always go to voice mic, capture your voice or any sound. We always do that one. And I will label with cello. You can always also put your name. Now this track is highlighted. You can see it's like a different shade of gray. It's got this blue bar. And that means that if I record, I am going to record here on top of him. And so I'm going to do that for you all right now. Get my cello out. One cool thing, you might be wondering without the visual cues, how we start together. BandLab has a metronome, and we're set at 124 right now. This Mozart's in 4/4 time. You can change those if you want. And then this, I don't know if you can tell, but it took us a second to realize this is supposed to be like the old-fashioned metronome, like tick, tock, tick. That's that. So this would be metronome on. And then they have this feature. Here's the metronome again, same thing, metronome sound, volume, and a count in duration. So you can have 1 bar for nothing, 2 bars for nothing is often what we recommend students to do, or none at all. I'm going to have it at 1 bar count in, and that means that I'm going to hear a measure and I'm going to start at the same time as Gabe. I'm going to use headphones and we'll hear him, but the computer won't hear him. So the computer's just going to hear me playing. And so I'm just going to go ahead and record this part. Okay, and then I press stop record, and there's my track. One thing I'll warn you about, realized when we're doing this on Zoom that there is a bit of a latency, so it could be, and if you've ever done BandLab, sometimes there's a delay. Yeah, you can see that I'm delayed a little bit, and you just have to sneak it up. I know that might look a little weird, but it means that it's just a Zoom computer thing, or sometimes it happens other times. But now you've got the viola line and you've got the cello line. And then what I would do in this step is I would listen back and press the play button here and see how I did. Okay. And at that point, one thing we do in the getting to know you step is we have the students with their scores and their pencils ready to mark anything they notice about how their part relates to the part that they're playing along with. And I would notice, and obviously I have the same rhythm as Gabe. So I would mark in my part that we use the term rhythm buddies. We stole that term from the Bayberry String Quartet. I would mark that we're rhythm buddies there. We have the same rhythm. We also have the same note at one point, which I never would have known. If I hadn't done this step, I would probably mark that. And then you know what I would do is I'd probably just delete it. I'd probably just get rid of it. And then I'd go back and I would do it again. I would do the same process. Because let's face it, especially with a student group, that first time, it might be totally wonky, right? It might not be together at all. It might be a complete mess. They don't know how their parts line up. So I would do the same time. I would record, listen back, mark anything new I noticed, delete. And we give our students 3 times. This is part of the wellness in the approach. We give them a max 3 times because we don't want them to go down that rabbit hole of, oh my gosh, it's not perfect. And, you know, they're feeling really sort of, you know, on display with the recording aspect. So we say 3 times. You can, if you're worried that maybe your second time is going to be the best go, you can add tracks and sort of save each one, and then you'll pick your favorite at the end. But we say just 3 times and then you're done. And then you've got a choice. Once you've done those 3 times, you have a pretty good understanding of the other person's part. You've got your score beautifully marked. You could actually just exit and not save it. And nobody's heard it. It's just been your own exploratory process. No coach has listened to it. It's just been a step along the way of getting to know the music. You could also save it. We say save, not publish. Publish is like the whole world sees. So we would say save the track. And then at that point in your own sort of teaching, you could have the students listen together to their getting to know you step. You could listen with them and coach them along the way, or not. It could just be sort of an informational thing. So it's really up to you what you want to do. We have everybody do this with all the parts. So I would, let's say manageable chunk is this 5 bars. Everybody's done their each own version of it. And then we get to know all the other parts. And so by the end, you get to know, you know, the music really well and how your part fits with everybody else's. There are some wonderful benefits to this step. I really love this step. One benefit is that you really, like I said, you really get to know the other parts. And we never get to do this in real life. Like, when would I pull Stephanie into another room and say, okay, play your entire part with me? Like, we just don't do that. So you get to know the music so intimately. Like I said, I never would have known Gabe and I had an F sharp in that one measure. And I remember when we were learning this piece and I did Getting to Know You, I was like, oh, no kidding. You know, I'm so glad I did this. Another thing is that you get to know your colleagues and your peers playing. You get to know their style. You get to know the flavor of how they play. And I've gotten to know my 3 colleagues playing so well by playing along with them so much and listening so closely. Related to that is each person gets a chance to play their part the way they want to play it. And I'm referring to that first person who's laid down the first track and Getting to Know You. That person may play it on the string and the next person might play it off the string, but at least that person's gotten a chance to play it their way. So it's a time for everybody's voice to get heard, and then you can have conversations about how you want it to match. But a lot of times in rehearsals, people's ideas kind of get lost. And in this way, everybody gets a chance to do it their own way. One thing that we recommend in this step is when you're getting to know the other person, you play it the way they're playing it, even if you disagree. Even if you wanted it on the string and they did it off, you do it their way and you can have a conversation later. But the idea is to get to know. The idea is to we use the word surrender. Surrender, do it the way they're doing it. If they kind of slow down with them. Now for a beginner group, it might just be, they're just trying to like line it up. It might just be a really sort of simple, let's just get these rhythms lined up. But for a more advanced group, you might be talking about the phrasing, the dynamics, the articulation. You might be getting into more detail. So it just depends on the level of the group and what you think the group can handle. As you probably saw, a score study is embedded in the process. I know in my in-person chamber music coachings, I struggle to know how to incorporate score study, and here it's just like in the process, and it's painless and it's interesting, and you wind up with a really beautiful part at the end. So that's a thing I really love about this step. And I'll say it's just a step that we don't do in person. This goes into the why virtual chamber music has some benefits. Yeah, this is going back to Nurit's part, is that we don't get a chance, or we don't take the opportunity. Some practical aspects of this step, you could do this synchronous or asynchronous. In other words, if you are running a program this fall and your students are having coachings once a week, you could take that time to be the getting to know you time, and everybody spends that hour doing the getting to know you with each of the parts in a particular section. Because it's 3 times maximum, it kind of takes about the same amount of time for everyone to do it. So you could just have that be what you do. Or as Nurit was suggesting, this could be totally asynchronous. Like students could do this at 1 in the morning whenever they have the time to do it. They don't need a coach there unless you want to be sort of constantly listening and helping them along. So this could be synchronous or asynchronous. You could, they said, follow up with a coaching if you want them to save it. You could listen together and discuss the getting to know you tracks, or you could just tell them delete it, it's part of the process, and go on to the next step. So it's up to you if you want to follow it up with a coaching or not. And then just another practical thing, if you're wondering about the use of the metronome, you could use a metronome or not in this step. The first person could or could not, the second person could or could not. For me, even if the first person has and is playing pretty metronomically, I just want to hear the person. I don't want to hear the click. I'll be distracted, and I want to really match what the person's doing. But for other people, it might be helpful, like a student group, it might be helpful to have that metronome clicking so they know where they are in the beat. So that's something you can choose to do or not to do. So I hope that seeing this step gives you some ideas for steps that you could do with your students or your colleagues in your programs. I hope you see some of the possibilities of layering, that it's not just like layer your parts, but there's sort of lots of variations and different shades of gray in the process, and that it can be really insightful and fun and enlightening. So we recommend that you try this one out with your students or with your own professional chamber groups.
So the other steps in our process are similar in that they're encouraging the players to learn, to problem solve, and to share. We've kind of spoken about some of these, but I wanted to touch on the sharing a little bit. That typically we think of sharing as like a culmination of all the work and like a final performance. And with the online process, sharing is really a regular part of what you're doing. And so it's a really nice way for you to feel like you're getting feedback and not feeling like it's a moment of judgment. I also just wanted to mention quickly that we really want the learning to maintain ease and joy. So our sequence focuses the players on specific concepts at different points in the process. So the skills, we start with more fundamental concepts like playing with a steady pulse, and then later we start to move into more interpretive ideas. Our method steps are by no means the only way to work through music online. And we really want to encourage you to come up with your own process that directs the learning in a way to fit your program's needs. We found that recording and listening back is so helpful that essentially you can learn any way that you layer the voices. And it is the embracing of the online environment that is so important, because it can redirect the education to be about the process, which allows for deeper learning with less anxiety.
I see that it's 4:50, and I sort of wanted to summarize everything that we talked about. I don't think we have to do that. Well, maybe I'll just say that everybody, I think it's pretty clear, we use Zoom, we use BandLab, we really care about the social component when we're teaching. We want to keep that alive for the kids. As a parent, I can tell you that my kids feel incredibly lonely, and that's what's going to really attract them to this kind of process. And we're trying to stay more attuned to their wellness, and we use those breakout rooms in Zoom to avoid shaming kids, and also to just give personal attention. And you've learned about one of Laura's favorite steps, getting to know you. And if your students do want to gain fluency on these platforms, we would recommend that they attend one of our workshops. We're giving 3 workshops in the fall, and they're just weekend-long intensive workshops where we take them through many more steps of this method. And it can help, or if you want to come as a participant so that you can get more ideas, then that's great. It's also similar to a regular chamber music program, like we could put a group together for you, or for your student. And I think we should open up the floor to questions. I see that we have actually already some questions up in the chat.
Yes, these are really great questions. One of them was, have you tried layering tracks with younger, less experienced students? I believe the youngest we've gone is 10, and they had a positive experience. Does anybody have anything they want to add to that?
I just want to say before we move on to the Q&A, in case people leave, we're going to stick around and answer questions, right, Bayberries? So, for those of you who need to go, thank you so much. If you found this webinar to be helpful, we worked really hard to organize it for you. Obviously, it would be great if you, consider checking out our programs, but also a donation to Education for Happiness, which is the parent company that, the nonprofit that paid to have all this happen. That would certainly be appreciated too. So. Okay, on to questions.
Yeah, here's 2 people have asked about the Zoom BandLab combination. So maybe we could talk about that. We basically, Zoom is for the communicating, the talking part, and BandLab is for the playing. So we will have both going at the same time sometimes, and we'll just mute ourselves and play and then talk. And so we use Zoom for that kind of social connection. But then a lot of times, if we're doing asynchronous, we're not on Zoom, like we're just recording on BandLab. So the music happens on BandLab, and Zoom is to sort of connect ourselves, chatting and visually. We use Zoom for breakout rooms a lot with our workshops. That each group has their own breakout room. I suppose if you just had one group, it doesn't have to be Zoom. Like it could be any kind of a platform similar. So let's see, other questions. Do you find that this online system works better for certain kinds of repertoire than other kinds? Anybody else want to field that one? I can take it if you want.
I can take it.
Go for it.
While I'm taking it, if someone could just grab the link for a donation, that somebody just asked for that. One way, all of us are involved in the Suzuki method in different ways. And, with all of the things that have been going on, there's a lot of thought about rethinking how we view education. And one of the things that I really appreciate about the Suzuki method is the idea of a preset common repertoire. But I think there's another thing that could actually really basically be the same concept and be able to knit a community together, and that's a preset common process. Because if there's a preset common process, sort of like in a yoga studio, you have room for creativity within that process, including whatever repertoire you want to pick. And with all the discussion about privilege and about equality, there's no reason that specific folk songs, for example, should be learned over other folk songs. And so I think that the opportunity to give participants more choice is something I'm really proud of. So at our festivals, I would highly recommend trying to allow more, there are a lot of good arrangements of non-classical works out there that I think deserve attention. And so I guess that's my answer.
I also would like to address the question, because I have a feeling the person who asked it, Philip, maybe you're wondering, wait, can I do Elliott Carter like this? And the answer is yes. I was just telling the string quartet that if we rehearsed Webern this way, I would be so delighted, because I get so nervous when I get up on stage to do Webern. And here I know it'll just be all lined up nicely. So I think in a way, the more complicated the music, in a way, all the better.
Yeah. Let me just roll through a couple of these sort of tech ones. Does BandLab work on iPads or is it just laptops, computers? It works on any device. We have found it only works on Chrome as the browser, just so you know. But otherwise, you know, phones and iPads and whatever.
And through an app on mobile devices.
Yes, an app on the mobile device. Thank you. Familiar Audacity versus BandLab. I love Audacity for some editing, but BandLab is online and it's a real-time sharing. So you go to the website and you record online, and then we get our tracks instantly. We can share instantly. There's no extra uploads or anything. It's just all on the website, and then we can layer instantly. So I use Audacity for some things, but I wouldn't use it for this. Let's see. How do you choose what order you record your parts? How does the order change the focus and experience? Somebody talk about that?
Oh, we can all talk about that all day long, because we also may not agree. I mean, actually, the four of us pretty much we're pretty pliable, and I'm happy however we lay it down. Some people would say that your rhythm is, or your rhythmic structures should be the determining factor that makes you the first person to lay down a track. The consistency in your rhythm. Clearly, if you have a lot of rests, you know what? Don't go first. So I would say that's a simplified answer, but one would argue that the melody should go first.
You know, and maybe an even broader answer would be that the answer is within the question, that your exploration of it, and each time you explore, it will sound terrible in a different way. This is another way that I'm sort of pushing back against the Suzuki method, that in the Suzuki method, I wish we would think, instead of 10,000 times correctly, I wish we would make 10,000 different mistakes. Because if you can make 10,000 different mistakes trying to do the same thing, then you can bet you're going to be really good at it, probably in more ways than one. And maybe you'll have discovered like 6 other ways to do it. So I think we really want to encourage that, that rather than a prescribed series of steps that work, I think if you approach it that way, you've already lost. You have to be willing to just be silly, be creative, try things. And there's another, does anyone want to speak to that? I was going to segue into rubato. Does anyone want to talk about that?
The only thing I would say, if you're curious, for the clip you heard in the Mozart, it went me, viola, first violin, second violin. And after great discussion, that was deemed, yeah. And for various reasons, but yeah. Okay, Gabe, go ahead.
Well, and so with the question about rubato, I didn't actually see who asked it, but is exactly what our next unit is. So this first unit that we work is trying to make something steady, predictable, and precise. And then, of course, the next step is to try to make it flexible. And again, I want to just tell you, and I will, right? I should, but it's the answer that I would rather hear, the answer that you would come up with personally. So that's my little answer to you. But what we do is we replace the click track with a human voice. And so then the discussion moves to a new level. That's not about notes at all. And what it did for us, it's not so much that that's like this brilliant idea, you know, it's that it generated new discussions and new places for us to either see a stop sign or a green light. You know, every time we hit a point where it didn't make sense, it wasn't working, we had to decide, this is not the end, this is the beginning of something. And if that's the spirit that you go about it, then you can try anything, try lots of stuff. But that's the way that we honed it on.
That came from the Cleveland Quartet originally, didn't it?
The expressive counting,
Expressive counting.
to my knowledge, yes, that's a Cleveland Quartet technique that I learned a long time ago. I don't know about the other members of the group, but I think that approach was very influential for a lot of groups. When the Cleveland Quartet talked about it.
There's one question that I would love to get to, and then I think we maybe got them all, and then I think we'll call it. And it's, how long does it take the process to click with the students? In other words, do most students respond well quickly, or does it take some time to convince them of the benefits of the process? Anybody?
I can answer it quick. Laura, go ahead. Were you going to talk? Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna, I mean, my answer was that pretty quick. I mean, we give them a little tutorial just to get them set up, and we give them a little warm-up exercise. Gabe came up with it. They tell a knock-knock joke using BandLab as their like practice. Do they understand how to use the system? So we start with a tutorial, and then we get them rolling, and we are there to answer their questions. So once they kind of figure out the tech, then they roll. I would say they roll pretty quickly. That's my short answer. I don't know if you have more to say.
I think that each time we run it, we get a little bit more proficient, but that it for some of them, I will say that under the age of 12, it takes longer for them to feel good about it. And that as they move into, say, age 15, 16, it makes a lot of sense. And also it depends on the person. Like my high school buddy who, is not a musician, but, played in his own garage band. When I explained what we were doing, it made sense to him immediately. So I think it depends on how you listen to music, how you grew up, things like that. But I would say under the age of 12 is a little trickier, and you need a less rigid system, I think, for under the age of 12.
There was one more request to just show the character model really fast, so I'm going to do that.
Would you show that maybe, and Gabe, you can give a closing.
Oh, and I just want to say, Terry Einfeld said she found that her 11-year-olds figured out how to work it, but to get them to actually produce when working once a week took many reminders. Right. So maybe that sort of speaks to what I was saying, that, I think it's pushing it for their young minds, which is fine. That's fine. Most parents don't want kids that young online that much anyway. Okay, and then we'll show the character model again. Thank you for asking again. Anyone have any specific questions about the character model? All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming. Do any of my quartet mates have anything they want to say in closing?
We appreciate you spending the last hour with us.
Yes, thank you. Please contact us if you have any questions or need anything.
Yeah, thank you. It's an honor to have you here. Thank you, and an honor to work with the three of you. It's just been a pleasure.
Ditto.
Oh, more questions coming in. Oh, they're just saying thank you. Okay, thank you, everyone. Bye.